Heavy downpours overnight devastate homes, roads, and farmland across the country. More rain is in store for the south until Saturday. The National Assembly passes a bill that mandates medical institutions to register the birth of newborns. This comes on the heels of recent murders in the city of Suwon, where a woman killed her 2 infants without having registered their birth, sparking national outrage. From the first day of July, some changes are set to happen in Korea. There will be no more tax breaks when buying a car, while year-end tax refunds will be available for movie tickets, among other changes. It's June 30th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We begin with the weather updates. Heavy downpours overnight hit the southern regions of the country, damaging houses, farmland, and roads. The capital, Seoul, though, saw a brief respite from the heavy rain today, but there are heat concerns. Our Moon Hae-ryun brings us up to speed.
The continued downpours across the country have not only led to losses of life, but also damage to crucial infrastructure, such as houses and roads. A 14-month-old baby was killed in a landslide on Friday morning in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, following heavy rain of 230 millimeters in the region. The day before, the body of a 67-year-old woman was found in Hamgyong County after she was swept away while inspecting a floodgate as a guard at an irrigation facility. Hundreds of Koreans across the country have been evacuated from their homes to temporary shelters such as town halls. In Jeollanam-do province, located in the southernmost part of the country, 303 people were evacuated from their homes and temporarily relocated to the town hall and relatives' houses in other areas. People also experienced power cuts and temporary water shortages as a result of the heavy rain. 185 houses in Gyeonggi-do province in the north went through a blackout, and 3 apartment complexes in Gwangju in the south suffered from water shortages brought on by power outage in the pump room which supplies the buildings with tap water. It isn't just residential buildings that have been affected. A warehouse in Jeollabuk-do province was submerged in rainwater, and a restaurant building in Gwangju city was damaged by the collapse of a retaining wall. The rain has also wreaked devastation on crops and farmland, with an estimated 2,028 hectares of rice fields in Jeollabuk-do damaged by flooding. This area is equivalent to roughly 3,800 football fields. Roads are being cut off in central regions, with 5 people being stranded following the submersion of their vehicle before they were rescued by emergency services. The Korea Meteorological Administration has sent out heavy rain advisories for Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces. Heavy rain advisories are sent out when 60 millimeters of rain or more are forecast over 3 hours, or 110 millimeters of rain or more for 12 hours. The weather agency has forecast that the heavy rain will continue in the south on Saturday and advised people to stay alert and respond quickly to dangerous situations that may arise. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
A new revision to the existing Act on Family Registrations was passed at the National Assembly today. It will require medical institutions to report the birth of newborns. This follows recent killing incidents of unregistered infants that shocked the nation. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
South Korea's National Assembly at its plenary session on Friday passed a bill requiring hospitals to report the birth of newborns to a government agency under the Ministry of Health and Welfare. The revision to the Act on Registration of Family Relations was passed with 266 approvals and 1 abstention, with 267 lawmakers present. The change means that both the medical institutions and the parents of newborns are responsible for registrations.
Within 14 days of the birth of a child, the head of the medical institution needs to report birth information to the Health Insurance Review and Assessment Service.
If the infants aren't properly registered after the registration deadline, the head of regional administration will be able to do so upon approval of the court. The revision will be promulgated at a cabinet meeting in the near future and will be implemented a year after that. Now, this legislation follows a recent criminal case where a woman strangled her 2 infants to death shortly after their births in 2018 and 2019 and kept their bodies in a refrigerator in her home in the city of Suwon. The case caused a public uproar, bringing attention to the current birth registration system in which only parents are required to report the birth of their children to the government within a month. To prevent loopholes such as births outside of hospitals, the parliament will come up with follow-up legislation to make available an anonymous birth process to mothers in need. The parliament also passed the first bill of its kind aimed at protecting virtual assets such as Bitcoin. The bill, passed with 265 approvals and 3 abstentions among 268 lawmakers present, aims to regulate the unfair trade of virtual assets. It defines virtual assets and requires virtual asset service providers to take necessary measures to protect the assets of their users. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
The South Korean Air Force's Command and Control, which oversees anti-ballistic missile operations, is being rebranded as the Operational Center for Korea Air and Missile Defense. The transformation was marked in a ceremony on Friday. The Air Force says this will enable it to react faster and more efficiently in tracking ballistic missiles and processing and forwarding related information. KAMD formed South Korea's tripartite missile defense system, along with the preemptive strike system known as the kill chain and the Korean massive punishment and retaliation mechanism. Tomorrow is the first day of July, which means we enter the second half of 2023. With that, some policy changes are set to follow, such as no more tax breaks when buying a car. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-hyun guides us through what you need to know.
There will be some policy changes that take effect in the second half of the year. The Finance Ministry on Friday released a booklet on all of them. Some will be quite major. First, in the finance sector, the cut in consumption tax on passenger cars will be terminated starting on July 1st. The government slashed auto tax to 3.5% from 5% to boost domestic demand amid COVID-19, but will be going back to the original rate. Any movie tickets bought from July 1st will be eligible for year-end tax refunds of 30%. And starting July 4th, when transferring money overseas, the limit has been raised to $100,000 a year without the need to show proof of where the money came from. People who exceed their duty-free exemptions when traveling to Korea can now use a mobile app to report it and pay additional taxes. Meanwhile, to make the market more accessible, the registration system for foreigners looking to invest in Korean securities will be scrapped. Next, in the industry, land, and transport sectors. With the revision of intelligent robot development legislation, November will see the commercialization of outdoor mobile robots. In December, to strengthen companies' response to the supply chain crisis, the industry minister will designate some of the important materials, parts, and equipment that are heavily relied on. There will also be a support system for the victims of jeonse fraud, the large deposit housing rental system. In the food sector, the government will set aside funds specifically to invest in food tech-related companies. This is going to start with $7.5 million this year, with the aim of reaching $75 million by 2027. The 1001 Breakfast Project for university students will also be expanded. More than 2.3 million students will be eligible, up from 690,000. Other measures include providing more welfare services so that those who need care have access to it. Education on and management of drugs will be strengthened too, while rehabilitation for drug addiction will be expanded to local provinces. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Findings for the month of May show tangible improvements in industrial output, facility investment, and private spending, but growth in the chip sector remains slow. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young has more.
South Korea's overall industrial production, spending, and investments all rose last month for the first time in 3 months. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Friday, industrial production in May rose 1.3% from the month before, the biggest jump in 14 months. Statistics Korea attributed the rise to growth in manufacturing production, particularly thanks to robust performances in the automobile and chip sectors. However, the chip industry is still experiencing a sluggish recovery. After posting a decline for the first 2 months of this year, semiconductor production saw remarkable growth of 30.9% in March. After that, growth slowed with a rise of 4.9% in April and 4.4% in May.
Chip production has been sluggish and inventory levels have remained high. The semiconductor industry is forecasted to see a slight improvement in the latter half of this year or even next year.
On the other hand, the service industry saw a drop of 0.1% due to a decline in the accommodation and restaurant sectors. Retail sales, a barometer for consumer demand, saw a rise of 0.4% as people spent more on durable goods such as home appliances. Facility investment also gained 3.5% a month thanks to more investment in the machinery and aircraft sectors. Despite the latest figures, economic recovery overall still remains modest due to weak growth. Statistics Korea said that mining and manufacturing industrial production is still lower than a year before due to sluggish IT industry and weak impact of China's reopening. It added that uncertainty may rise depending on the pace of recovery in the IT industry and economic trends of major countries. 신하영, Arirang News.
South Korea's national tax revenue for the first 5 months of the year has recorded its sharpest ever year-on-year drop. Data from the Ministry of Economy and Finance released on Friday show that revenue in that period came to a little over $121 billion. That's a fall of more than $27 billion. The nation's tax revenue for May saw a drop of nearly $2 billion. When compared to the budget for this year, the amount of revenue collected accounted for only 40%, the lowest on record. The ministry mainly attributed this to weak corporate performances and a decline in property taxes from fewer real estate transactions. Will K-musical be next in line to lead the Korean wave? As our 신새벽 reports, Korea's original musicals are seeking ways to take center stage on the global entertainment scene.
Producers of Korean musicals eagerly seeking to establish a global presence are gathering in central Seoul. The K-musical market, now in its third year, is a business platform designed to promote the sector's growth. Industry insiders from around the world are gathering to explore production and investment opportunities.
I think there's a real opportunity for synergy between what I think will become the home of musical theatre development and the world's largest shop window.
The event has served as a pivotal stepping stone for Korean musicals to expand their global reach. Last year, 3 out of 20 original musicals were successfully licensed to overseas producers. And this year, 50 musicals are being pitched and 4 musicals showcased. With an eventual goal of making Korean musicals go universal, South Korea's Culture Ministry is providing a 4-step support mechanism. The K-musical market is the first step where original musicals have their potential showcased to investors at home and abroad. The next is the K-musicals roadshow in Asia. The third goes one step further to showcase works in global musical hubs such as Broadway and the West End. And the final stage will be localization and co-production with overseas producers. The ministry has vowed to spur efforts for the further growth of Korean musicals.
I envision K-musicals being performed and loved throughout the world, including in New York's Broadway and in London. The Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism will do our best to help that come true.
Performers also believe that South Korea could soon become a global musical sanctuary.
Growing support programs can be translated to more quality musicals. In that way, we can go beyond exporting musicals. People would travel to Korea to see those shows. The musical industry would serve as a new growth engine for the nation's tourism sector.
South Korean musicals are paving the way to not only lead the next wave of K-culture, but also the global entertainment industry. 신새벽, Arirang News.
In the city of Bucheon, curtains went up on the city's annual International Film Festival Thursday night, offering a chance to explore alternative films and indie actors. Where Lee Soo-jin was there.
The rainy weather couldn't dampen the spirits at this year's Bucheon International Fantastic Film Festival. The festival kicked off on Thursday evening, continuing its slogan of Stay Strange from 2021, which reflects its goal of promoting alternative films and indie actors. It also added another slogan this year, Cinema Plus.
The Korean film industry has faced many difficulties during the past 3 years because of the pandemic. The slogan Cinema Plus represents the need for the movie industry to evolve to overcome these difficulties.
The Bucheon International Fantastic Film Festival is one of the largest genre film festivals in Asia. It features 262 films from 51 countries this year. And this year's festival also coincided with Bucheon's 50th anniversary of gaining city status. The festival brought in attendees from around the globe.
And we have a world premiere for our short film, so it's the first time we're coming in contact with people outside of our small pool in Austria.
Many stars such as legendary South Korean actors An Sung-gi, Kim Sung-gyun, and Yang Dong-gun graced the red carpet for the opening night. The opening film this year was the tragicomedy horror film Beau is Afraid, written and directed by Ari Aster, the renowned filmmaker behind Midsommar.
It's an honor to be here. I love Korean cinema, and so it's a thrill to be here in Korea presenting this film and to be opening this festival.
The festival is also known for highlighting the career of one actor each year that represents Korean cinema, and this year it was none other than Choi Min-sik, known for his cult classic films such as Old Boy. The film festival, which will be held until July 9th, will continue to hold screenings of films from various genres, as well as master classes led by world-renowned directors. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And for more stories on arts and culture, we have our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin here in the studio. Welcome, Yoo-jin.
Thank you, Jung-min.
What do you have for us today?
Well, Jung-min, I want to start off this week with a question. Do you remember last week, Korean ballerina Kang Min-sun, she won Best Female Dancer for the well-renowned competition, the Benoit de la Danse?
Of course I do. The award is one of the highest honors for dancers.
You're exactly right. And to kind of celebrate her win, I had a chance to attend a press conference that she did where she talked about her more than 20-year journey as a really dedicated ballerina. And while listening to her story, it made me really think about how more Korean artists are really making their mark in various fields in art, from ballet, of course, and to classical music. So for this week, I explore the reasons why. With elegant arm gestures, light jumps, and elegant twirls, Korean ballerina Kang Mi-sun claimed this year's Benoit de la Danse, often referred to as the Oscars of dance. Kang, the principal dancer at Universal Ballet, one of Korea's top 2 professional ballet companies, has become the 5th Korean dancer to win this award. What makes her victory even more remarkable is that she achieved it through a Korean original ballet piece called 미리네길, where she portrays the deep sorrow of a widowed woman.
I always thought I could do better, so I've always strived to perfect those flaws within me. And before I knew it, 20 years have just flown by. I hope to become someone who can make a positive impact, someone who can lend a helping hand to young ballerinas.
But Kang's win was not the only good bit of news in the Korean arts industry. A few weeks ago, baritone singer Kim Tae-han made history as the first Asian male to win the esteemed Queen Elizabeth competition. And last year, pianist Im Yoon-chan became the youngest ever winner of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. In the past, it was uncommon to see Koreans or even Asians rise to the top in international competitions, given the Western origins of ballet and classical music. Then, what's the secret behind their success?
Competitions these days don't just focus on technical aspects. They also evaluate artistic expression. From a young age, Korean artists devote themselves to mastering both technical proficiency and artistic brilliance. Their rigorous training process and participation in numerous competitions at home have shaped them into remarkable talents.
But while these individual achievements shine a spotlight on the arts and spur public interest, it's essential to address the broader needs of the industry.
To establish a thriving art scene in South Korea, we not only need exceptionally talented individual artists, but also world-class orchestras, dance companies, and a solid funding system to support these talents. Unfortunately, Korea has a tendency of focusing only on competition results and trophies, overlooking the significance of expanding the reach of the arts.
These efforts will pave the way for future Kang Mi-seons and Kim Tae-hans to emerge.
Can't wait to see more talented artists on the global stage. And I heard there are some exciting news today as well.
Yes, there is, Jung-min. So 3 Korean musicians, they won the top prizes at this year's International Tchaikovsky competition that drew to a close on Thursday local time at Russia. And although this year the number of participants reduced due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this competition has been regarded as one of the top 3 international competitions with the Queen Elizabeth competition and the International Chopin Piano competition. These 2 competitions South Korean musicians have topped at, and the winners are Kim Ge-hee in violin, Lee Young-eun in cello, and Son Ji-hoon in the voice category. And what's really amazing is that this is the first time Korean musicians have won the top prizes in the instrumental categories.
And Eugene, you said it's important to popularize the arts to strengthen the industry. Is there any being done now?
Well, there actually is. So a couple of weeks ago, after Kim Tae-han won the Queen Elizabeth competition, the Culture Ministry launched several initiatives to really nurture the Korean classical music industry. And one of the main points is to really expand the performance opportunities of state-run music companies here in Korea. So for example, the National Chorus of Korea is set to perform in 3 American cities in September to commemorate the 70 years of the South Korean-U.S. alliance. And not only this, but overseas Korean cultural centers are organizing diverse performances featuring Korean classical musicians, such as a concert tour across Europe later this year in honor of the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties between South Korea and the European Union. And back here at home, to really cultivate more Korean musical talent, state-run orchestras and opera studios will create more training programs to really grow more aspiring future musicians.
What an ambitious plan. Thanks for your report, Eugene.
Thank you.
The stationary rain front has now moved down towards the south of the country. While rain has subsided for the Seoul metropolitan area, southern regions and the surrounding areas will see rain until tomorrow. Jeju Island will see torrential downpours of up to 250 millimeters. The south coast will see up to 120. Eastern regions, including Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces, can expect 10 to 60 millimeters. After the rain tapers off, a blistering heat wave will bake the country. Overall conditions for this weekend are forecast to be mostly sweltering and humid. Daytime highs will be hiking up to 34 degrees Celsius in Seoul. Chances are high that many inland regions will be under heat wave alerts tomorrow. Extreme heat can lead to dehydration and other heat-related illnesses, so please take extra precautions. Morning temperatures in Seoul will start off at 24 degrees tomorrow. Sweltering conditions will dominate for the daytime. Highs in Seoul will get up to 34 degrees. Gwangju 32, Busan and Jeju will reach 27 degrees. Another monsoonal rain front will enter the country next Tuesday, spreading nationwide showers. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Korea. Some people call it the country of Taekwondo.
People are more interested in Korean culture and other aspects of it, and one of those things is Taekwondo.
Surtout, ne commencez jamais le taekwondo, parce que si jamais un jour vous commencez, vous ne pourrez jamais vous arrêter d'en faire.
아, 정말 이렇게 제 인생을 좌우할지는 정말 몰랐어요. 왜냐하면 태권도의 나라, 한국에서 태권도를 하고 싶어서 한국에 처음 왔는데 지금은 13년째 살고 있습니다. 태권도 이런 무술입니다.
저는 사실 한 달만 하고 포기할 줄 알았어요. 근데 너무 재밌어요.
What I really like about Taekwondo is that it doesn't only give you the physical abilities, such as like flexibility or strength, it also gives you the mental abilities.
I love the spirit of Taekwondo. It's great martial arts with a lot of respect, a lot of values. Also with the Pumse, very beautiful techniques. It's a sport that you can, it's a martial art that you can practice from 7 to your old age.
I've never seen them be so committed to anything if they've played other sports, but nothing like this before.
Especially when like two very little kids are fighting, because it's really fun to watch.
So it's a great way for all of us to do this together.
I'm gonna keep doing Taekwondo until this becomes a black belt.
오지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요.
Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bucheon. South Korea is expecting an economic recovery in the second half of the year, and thus authorities here have vowed to focus on promoting exports and business investment. However, many say this slump might not actually ease just yet, given that China's reopening is not having much of a positive impact, and there are exchange rate issues as well, such as a weak yen. Will South Korea really be able to see an economic rebound? For an in-depth analysis, we invite Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University, and we also have Professor Hwa-Kyun Kim from Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Professors, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for being here. Now, first question to our Professor Se-won. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on Wednesday said inflation has clearly slowed over the first half of this year. How do you see the country's inflation, and are there any uncertainties that might still affect it?
It is true that domestic inflation is quickly cooling down to 3% level on year after the peak of 6.3% in July last year. But it is expected that inflation will stay around 3% level without a fast decrease by the end of this year. In May, consumer inflation eased for a fourth consecutive month to the lowest level in 19 months at 3.3% on year. But the core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, rose 3.9% on year. The core inflation is starting to soften, but it is still at high levels and will not cause any meaningful change for a while. This is a major signal that inflation does not quickly decrease in the near future. And the inflation outlook is still highly uncertain because of risks from global oil prices, economic growth, and public utility price increases.
Right, so inflation did slow down, but it is still above the target. Now, Professor Se-won, one more question. Mr. Chu also pointed out that the job market has remained strong over the first half. What does this say about South Korea's economy?
Domestic labor market is improving at the market-wide level. If we take a look at the unemployment rate, which is the most well-known barometer of labor market, it decreased down to 2.7% from the peak of 3.6% early this year. That means in 5 months, the unemployment rate dropped by 0.9%, which indicates a still robust labor market amid slowing economic growth. But it should be noted that we have different labor market temperature over different age cohorts. The job increase was led by the people in their 60s and older, which offset declines in other age groups. In the same month, in May, young workers between 20 years old to 29 years old, unemployment rate was 5.9%, almost 6%. But the old workers' unemployment is around 2%, which is much lower than that of the other age cohorts. By the end of this year, employment will likely continue its robust trend going forward, led by face-to-face services sector. But there are some risks in the labor market. Recovery in the manufacturing sector is expected to be delayed due to weak exports and weak, still not strong facility investment.
Right, I see. So the labor market is robust, but there are still some risks. Now, Professor Hwa-Kyun, South Korea's economy is seeing other difficulties as well, such as a drop in exports. Why is it seeing such prolonged sluggish exports?
I was interested in similar questions. So I looked at the data from the Korean customer services for the last 10 years, or about a decade. And there were some very big consistency in terms of the countries that Korea earns most of the surplus versus like the deficits. And the countries that the Korea has big positive surplus are, not surprisingly, US, Vietnam, Hong Kong, India, Turkey, and some European countries. On the other hand, the negative side, the deficits are Japan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Kuwait, Russia, and these kind of countries. As you can see, these are the countries that we usually import oils and raw materials. One country that I didn't mention is China. So the China, for the last decade, has been on the positive side, so that the Korea, as we know, earns a lot of surplus from here. But from like 2020, it was a big negative. So it's almost like from like top 1 to 3 countries that earns a positive to the top, like, the negative deficits, basically, after 2020. So it's a drastic regime switch. Clearly, it has more political and both economic reasons, but given the situations that we are facing with, it's not going to be that simple. The switch is going to be that fast. So probably, the Korea has to look for some other ways to recoup this deficits until the China situation is getting better. And in the future, probably we want to look at the other diversifications, because depending on one country for such big, the one number, I think, is probably risky.
Right, I see. So China is one of the biggest reasons why South Korea is seeing reduction and trade deficit.
Exactly.
Right. Now, Professor Hwa-kyun, and thus government vowed efforts to promote exports, but some worry that this record low yen is going to have a negative effect. How so, and how should Seoul tackle this problem?
So as I mentioned earlier, one of the countries that consistently giving negative deficit, big deficit, is Japan. It is so perennial that I rarely saw any positive surplus exporting and importing with like a trade with Japan. And I also look at the products and then the electronic parts and some of the electronic items, and also chemical materials and things like that are the big stuff that Korea purchased. And Japan purchased from Korea some agricultural products as well as some other IT stuffs. So as you can see, this is actually really the perennial persistent problem. So if it is not that easy to fix within a short amount of time, this weak yen probably is not a bad thing, right? Because you can purchase these items at cheaper prices. So on this side, it's actually a positive. It's not bad news. Worry, I think, is about, because Korea and Japan have some overlapping projects, that the products that they're competing, selling other countries. If the weak yen makes their products cheaper, so maybe the other countries may just swing from Korea to Japan in terms of purchasing. So that's probably the concerning part. So it's just my casual observation, but when I live in the US here, I see more and more Korean cars, just on the road nowadays, and the tendency has been pretty steep. So I think it's going to be a big test now when the Japanese cars are getting cheaper. Will just the U.S. consumers and others will switch to Japanese cars, or because of the better reliability and better design nowadays, if people will just keep purchasing the Korean cars? I think that's going to be the main sort of thing, thrust. And on other sides, I think the products are not that overlapped nowadays. So I think the effect is not going to be that severe. So the car, I think, is going to be the main part.
All right, I see your point. Now, up until now, we have been talking about difficulties that South Korea economy is facing right now. But Professor Seon, according to the central bank, South Korea's consumer sentiment was at its highest in 13 months in June, showing that people are quite optimistic that there is going to be a mild recovery in the economy. Is such optimism valid?
Korean economy is declining, actually, more than expected this year. But one thing positive about Korean economy is that households' consumption, which covers 60% of total GDP, is recovering slowly. That is also reflected in consumer sentiment index of Bank of Korea. Slowing inflation and post-pandemic activities recovery has seen Korea's consumer sentiment reached a 13-month high in June. The composite consumer sentiment index lifted to 100.7 in June. It was the first time that the figure broke 100 points since May last year and was the fourth consecutive monthly rise. A reading above 100 in consumer sentiment index means optimists outnumber pessimists. But the cost of dining out remains still high. Projected rise in public transportation fees, electric power, and gas are keeping the inflation expectations still high.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Hwa Kyun, before we move on to the policies in other countries that could affect South Korea, I'd like to ask you this question. South Korea's growth outlook for this year is expected to come out next week, and many forecast it to be trimmed yet again. How do you expect it to be?
It is still uncertain, clearly. And the one that just came out, the industrial activity, actually was positive. It was a bit unexpectedly positive boost. So it's an important part of the growth outlook. So I would revise a little bit more toward positive side, but still there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of growth, the potentials because of the export, because Korea is certainly very growth export driven country. Many of these forecasts actually are around 1.5. So government probably is going to revise downward to 1.5 or somewhere in between, like 1.5 and 1.6. Nice thing, or some silver lining, I think, is because these are relatively like a low bottom. So if there are certain, the resolution of uncertainty for the next 2 months or something, especially in terms of semiconductor chips or the international trade tensions and war situations, I think it probably can go better than 1.5 and go back to like 1.6 or 7 originally planned or the estimated. But at this stage, I think a conservative estimate probably is 1.5%. So yes, it's a little lower than we originally expected.
All right, I see. So although there is silver lining, we'll have to wait and see how it goes because there are a lot of uncertainties. All right, now let's also take a look at how the economy and policies in other countries could affect South Korea, as I mentioned before. Now, Professor Hwa Kyun, first on China. Profits at industrial firms in China declined more than 18% on year for the January to May period. This means tumbling post-COVID-19 recovery, right?
I think so. So clearly some of the worries that the economists and people actually talked about seems to unravel. So the demand is not as strongly recovering as people originally expected. And also the trade tensions clearly have some effect because at the end of the day, China is also, despite the size of the country, it's still a developing country. So they focus a lot on exports. So clearly the export, I think, has been reduced. So that affects the firm's profitabilities. And also their credit market is not so good. So clearly there are some defaults and bankruptcies going on. So the exact statistics not quite as available as other countries, but still I think that's probably what it is. And of course they try to they improve things by doing the more aggressive monetary policy easing, but we have to see.
Right. So though we could say the impact of China's reopening is not as much as we have expected it to be, Professor Sehwan, China is still expecting to achieve a 2023 growth target of around 5%, saying the second half economic growth will be higher than in the first half. How valid is this?
Of course, as Chinese economy goes up, so does Korean economy, because the two countries are still highly intertwined through a complementary industry structure to each other. Actually, according to KDI's report, which is government's largest think tank, 1% additional Chinese economic growth raises Korean economic growth by 0.2%, which shows the high correlation between the two countries. Beijing recently said that China is still on the track to reach its annual growth target of 5% on year. And growth in the second quarter was expected to be faster than it was in the first quarter. China's economic grew by 4.5% this quarter, better than expected. However, subsequent data have pointed to slower growth. But international economic institutions like World Bank, IMF all recently raised China's economic growth forecast for this year to up to 5% level. So I would say uplifted China's economic growth will give positive momentum to Korean economy growth through rising export to China.
I see. Let's turn our eyes to Washington as well. Professor Hwa-gyun, earlier this month, the Fed froze its benchmark rate, but it hinted that 2 further rounds of rate hikes would be delivered within this year. How is the economic situation in the U.S. right now, and what do you expect the Fed's decision is going to be?
Well, the recent statistics release say market is good, and also the labor market seems to be good, and then GDP is also strong. So I think economy is not bad, and the stock market seems to be reasonably doing fine. Some say it's even a bit of greedy mode. So the Fed is probably going to increase 25 basis points this July, and the Fed watch data also, based on the Fed futures, are also showing that around like 88% chance that it's going to increase 25 basis points. What people are talking about is afterwards, will it be the end or will they increase one more time? Clearly, the Fed's worry is from the back in like late 70s and early 80s. There was like this big M-shaped type of, the episodes of the inflation. So they worry about the second hump. What if that happens? So they try to be preemptively targeting interest rate higher. Worry is clearly the banking sector. And also, they don't worry too much about the consumption sector or labor market. So it's going to be a last-minute decision, but at this stage, the July one seems to be almost a consensus of 25 basis points, but the next one, I think, is going to be very uncertain.
Right, I see. So we would have to see what happens whether this rate hike trend is going to continue, but high chances that we'll see 25 basis point increase for next rate setting meeting. Now, Professor.
Precisely.
Right. Now, Professor Seoul, how about BOK? I mean, it is going to have rate setting meeting in July. What kind of decision do you believe it's going to make?
That is a tough question, Bucheon, because the situation changes over time until Bank of Korea's interest rate decision in July. If we take a look at Korean economy as a whole, domestic inflation pressure is weakening, but economic recovery is weakening too. So Bank of Korea wants to put higher priority on economic recovery and labor market recovery. As Professor Kim just talked about, in summer, U.S. Fed is expected to raise its key interest rate by 0.25%. Then the key interest rate gap between U.S. and Korea would be 2%. This much key interest rate gap is something not experienced by Bank of Korea before. So over 2% interest rate gap between U.S. and Korea, there could be something unexpected situation like capital outflow by foreign investors. But I would carefully say that Bank of Korea will leave its key interest rate at current level in July at 3.5%. But they will try to raise the key interest rate in August by 0.25% when Fed raises its key interest rate in July.
All right, I see your point. Now, I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Kim Se-won and Professor Kim Hwa-gyun, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and goodbye.
Arirang TV is conducting a quality and satisfaction evaluation to enhance the broadcast service for viewers